Welcome to this video about Amazon Simple Storage Service, also known as Amazon S3. My name is Haywood Osman and I'm a technical trainer with AWS. I will introduce you to Amazon S3, cover common usage scenarios, and then we'll get to see a quick demo of S3 in action. Let's begin. Amazon S3 is a fully managed storage service that provides a simple API for storing and retrieving data. This means that the data you store in S3 isn't associated with any particular server, and you don't have to manage any infrastructure yourself. You can put as many objects into S3 as you want. S3 holds trillions of objects and regularly peaks at millions of requests per second. Objects can be almost any data files, such as images, videos, or server logs. Since S3 supports objects as large as several terabytes in size, you could even store database snapshots as objects. Amazon S3 also provides low latency access to the data over the internet via HTTP or HTTPS, so you can retrieve data anytime from anywhere. You can also access S3 privately through a virtual private cloud endpoint. You get fine-grained control over who can access your data using identity and access management policies, S3 bucket policies, and even per-object access control lists. By default, none of your data is shared publicly. You can also encrypt your data in transit and choose to enable server-side encryption on your objects. Let's take a file we want to store, such as this welcome video. First, we need a place to put it. In S3, you can create a bucket to hold your data. When we want to put this video into our bucket as an object, we need to specify a key, which is just a string that can be used to retrieve the object later. A common practice is to set these strings in a way that resembles a file path. Let's put our video into S3 as an object with the corresponding key. When you create a bucket in S3, it's associated with a particular AWS region. Whenever you store data in the bucket, it is redundantly stored across multiple AWS facilities within your selected region. The S3 service is designed to durably store your data, even in the case of concurrent data loss in two AWS facilities. S3 will automatically manage the storage behind your bucket even as your data grows. This allows you to get started immediately and to have your data storage grow with your application needs. S3 will also scale to handle high volume of requests. You don't have to provision the storage or throughput, and you'll only be billed for what you use. You can access S3 via the Management Console, AWS CLI, or AWS SDK. Additionally, you can also access the data in your bucket directly via the REST endpoints. These support HTTP or HTTPS access. Here we see an example of a URL for an object constructed from the bucket name, S3 endpoint for the selected region, and the key we use when we store the object. To support this type of URL-based access, S3 bucket names must be globally unique and DNS compliant. Also, object keys should be using characters that are safe for URLs. This flexibility to store a virtually unlimited amount of data and access that data from anywhere makes the S3 service suitable for a wide range of scenarios. Let's look at some use cases for S3. As a location for any application data, S3 buckets provide that shared location for storing objects any instances of your application can access, including applications on EC2 or even traditional servers. This can be useful for user-generated media files, server logs, or other files your application needs to store in a common location. Also, because the content can be fetched directly over the web, you can offload serving of that content from your application and allow clients to directly fetch the data themselves from S3. For static web hosting, S3 buckets can serve up the static contents of your website, including HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and other files. The high durability of S3 makes it a good candidate to store backups of your data. For even greater availability and disaster recovery capability, S3 can even be configured to support cross-region replication, such that data put into an S3 bucket in one region can be automatically replicated to another S3 region. The scalable storage and performance of S3 make it a great candidate for staging or long-term storage of data you plan to analyze using a variety of big data tools. For example, data staged in S3 can be loaded into Redshift, processed in EMR, or even queried in place using tools such as Amazon Athena. You can also import or export large volumes of data into S3 using AWS import-export devices, such as Snowball. Given how simple it is to store and access data with S3, you'll find yourself using it frequently with AWS services and for other parts of your application. Now that we've covered S3 functionality and common use cases, you should be well on your way to identifying how S3 can help you as you build your application on AWS. Let's switch gears to a demo of S3 in action. Here we are in the Amazon S3 section of the AWS Management Console, and I can see that I have a listing of different buckets. What we're going to do in this section is we're going to go ahead and create a new bucket and then add some data to it and retrieve that data. Let's go ahead and click Create Bucket. Here I get prompted to set a bucket name and region. So the bucket name needs to be DNS compliant. I'll go ahead and set a name of Amazing Bucket 1, and then my next decision is on the region. In my case, I know that I have an application running on EC2 instances that needs to access this data, and that EC2 set of instances is in the Oregon region. So I'll go ahead and set my region to be US West Oregon. And at this point, I've made all the decisions that I need to make in order to create a bucket. The other steps in this wizard let me do things like turn versioning on my bucket or change the default permissions so that I could delegate access to this bucket to public internet users or to specific AWS users. In this case, I know that I want the default, so I'll just go ahead and hit Create. Now we can see that I have a bucket. It's called Amazing Bucket 1. If I go ahead and click on it, I'm prompted that the bucket is empty and I can upload new objects. I can also see what the properties and permissions were for this bucket. If I go ahead and hit Upload, I see that in the Management Console, I have the ability to drag and drop files and to modify the permissions on those files. But I would actually prefer to upload my data using the AWS CLI. So here I have opened the terminal window, and we can see that in this terminal window, I'm in a folder called Assets, and I have a file called demo.txt. Let's take a quick peek at this file, and we can see that it's a text file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this file over to my S3 bucket so I can access it later from my EC2 instances. I'll go ahead and use the S3 copy command to copy that demo.txt to an object that lives in Amazing Bucket 1 underneath the key hello.txt. So I've gone ahead and uploaded that data. I can also take the contents of a folder on my local machine and I can sync them using the sync command, and the CLI will handily take each of those files and check to see if it exists in the bucket, and then if it doesn't, it'll go ahead and upload it. So now we've uploaded code.zip and random.csv also to my bucket. If I go ahead now and I SSH into an EC2 instance, we can go ahead and see that this instance has been provisioned with an IAM role that gives it access to read any of the S3 buckets in my account. And let's go ahead and check to see from this EC2 instance what content is in that S3 Amazing Bucket 1. So go ahead and do an AWS S3 LS on the S3 Amazing 1 bucket, and I'll make that recursive so it'll check through all the paths. And I see that I have these 3 files. So just like before, I can do that copy command, but now I do it in reverse by specifying the bucket name first. And I've copied that hello.txt out of my bucket. I can go ahead and do an ls on my local EC2 instance storage, and I see hello.txt. If I do a cat, I can peek at the file and I can see that we have my text file downloaded. I could also do that sync command in reverse, so now I can sync the contents of Amazing Bucket 1/files to a local folder on my EC2 instance, and now I can see that I have a folder. The contents of that folder has those 2 files, code.zip and random.csv. So that really covers a simple getting started with S3 of putting data in and getting data back out. Let's switch back over to the Management Console and see and refresh it. So now I should see that I have some files in my S3 bucket. These are the same files that I saw from the Management Console and in the AWS CLI. I go ahead and hit hello.txt, and I can see some options. So here I have the opportunity to change properties and permissions on a per object basis, and I can see some of these attributes of this file. So that really covers getting started with the S3 service. In this video, we've covered an introduction to S3 and some common use cases, and in our demo, we got to go hands-on with creating a bucket, copying files into our bucket, and then downloading those files from an EC2 instance.